The cover page of One Piece Chapter 1089, titled The Siege Barricading Incident, is a really weird one. A cow with a tattoo brings hot milk to Nami at night while she's drawing sea charts, and Sanji is looking happily from the window. Over in Luffy's East Blue home of Fuchsia Village, the news of Garp's situation had already spread across the world. His status being unknown on Hachinosu had the people that knew him on edge. But despite his frustration, the mayor was certain that a man of legendary caliber like Garp did not need them to worry about him in the slightest. He would be just fine. Makino agreed with him, but once the old man heard laughter, he got pissed off and wondered what was so funny, only to then realize that the laughter was coming from Makino's kid. This made him apologize immediately, and after Garp's whole lecture, it's funny to see a situation between a baby and an old man come up in the story so soon after. Makino admitted that despite this, she couldn't help being worried about Garp. She would also add that her child had recently become familiar with Luffy's face thanks to all the papers. It was clear to her that the baby really liked their big brother Luffy. Wow, this man Luffy makes the news so often that infants are able to recognize him. So, is this our first taste of One Piece Shippuden? One Piece Next Generations? Is this kid the next Straw Hat? Will this kid inherit the Straw Hat itself? I'm just joking, but then again, you never know what Oda might be cooking up. Curly Dadan was crying over the predicaments Garp and Luffy had found themselves in. Magra also looks a bit different these days. But before Dadan could finish speaking, she noticed something that totally grabbed her attention. In the East Blue streets of Logtown, there was widespread panic on account of a vicious earthquake. Over in the East Blue, a terrible tsunami was on the rush towards an island. They needed to escape to higher ground. In the West Blue, the members of the Nihon Navy were scrambling, and in the North Blue, the conditions were no better. The earthquake caused on this day caused the widest range of damage that had ever been observed in the history of the world. In the Grand Line, Laboon felt the changes. The rumbling was felt in Water 7 by Iceberg, Tilestone, and some others. Rear Admiral Hina noticed it at Marine Headquarters, and Momonosuke felt it while overlooking his country. Some criminals were in a panic and wondering what was going on at sea. From the world below to the land of the Celestial Dragons, this disturbance was felt far and wide. Hell, even Lord Imusha, the epicenter of the crisis, could not be determined on account of the many strange geographies of the world. Ever since the Lucia Kingdom vanished from the maps, the resulting event that transpired a few days later, which was caused by the earthquake, raised the sea levels of the world by about 1 meter. So places like Long Ring Longland that were already so covered during high tide were bound to be screwed over by something like this. Water 7 in particular was said to be gradually sinking, so this may actually expedite the process a bit. A ship would call from the place where the Lucia Kingdom previously was. There was absolutely no trace of the former land mass, but in its place was a massive hole that had sea waterfalls forming around it. They could not afford to get any closer or they would be in danger of being sucked in. In fact, there was no sign that the hole would be closing up anytime soon. This is insane. Imu really just deleted an entire island, and all that's left is a literal void, the fallout from which has totally compromised the natural stability of the entire world. The spirit of nature is definitely not pleased. And what's really eerie is the fact that we may have already seen a hole in the ocean like this thanks to Enies Lobby. Pretty much the exact same phenomenon could be seen with the Judicial Island, which is to say that it is likely that this sort of thing has already happened before. This may very well be the reason why the world of One Piece consists of so many different islands in the first place. To have known the environmental ramifications of such an attack and still do so anyways is pretty crazy to think about. Imu really wanted to kill Sabo, but it completely failed, so what was the point? Over on Momoiro Island, the people of the Kamabaka Queendom could not believe what was happening. The island's beach had sunk lower than ever before. They assumed that the tide would recede at some point, but for now, they wouldn't be taking any long walks on the beach. The truth is that many shorelines and islands have totally vanished. On one island in particular, the flooding was so bad that the people had to abandon it completely. The place was unlivable. Sharks had even taken a residence in one person's home. It wasn't high tide season yet, but major flooding was being reported from various regions. Back in Fuchsia, someone hoped that they might be able to get a good haul of fish today, but another would scold them, saying that they better not sail in these sorts of conditions, and the old mayor seemed as if he could sense something foreboding. Which now brings us to the future island of Egghead, located in the New World. Even there, the current situation with the increased water level was well known, but its cause was a total mystery. The Navy presence that had been amassed around Egghead Island was one that had enough firepower to make a Buster Call look like a tea party. This impressive fleet was made up of more than 100 ships of various sizes and classes. A mechanical giraffe took a mean bite out of one of the marine ships, much to the horror of everyone on board. Among them were 20 great warships and a total of 30,000 Marines. A beam of light would pierce the mechanized creature and stop its rampage. Sentomaru would chastise Kizaru for harming one of the weaponized sea beasts against his wishes, but the admiral insisted that the monster had started it. This operation was being led by 9 Marine vice admirals. The two we know by name are Doberman and Dahl. There are a few guys here that we've seen before but don't know anything about, along with even more now added to the pile. But of course, they were also being led by Admiral Kizaru. While enjoying a bowl of ramen, the Admiral admitted that Sentomaru wasn't making this easy for him. He wondered if they couldn't just come out and surrender. But Sentomaru was not willing to bite at all. He spoke of having set up countermeasures, but Kizaru was unfazed. Sentomaru, while snacking on some onigiri himself, mentioned how Vegapunk had basic pacifista lasers on the research he was able to do on this guy's powers. This gave us a shot of a young Borsalino, Vegapunk, and Sentomaru. Kizaru looks very different here, so I would love to see more flashbacks with him included. Sentomaru could not believe that after all that, the Marine was here to kill the good doctor. Kizaru retorted that no one could protect Vegapunk from his own choice to research the Void Sentry. In the end, he was only a cog in the machine. But he did admit that this fight against Egghead Island was not totally in their best interest. After all, everything they break will end up being a net loss for them. After all this time, he figured it was pretty safe to assume that Rob Lucci and the members of CP0 had failed to successfully assassinate Dr. Vegapunk. Sentomaru gave all the credit to the Straw Hat Pirates. Seated inside one of the warships was one of the Gorosei. He wanted Doberman to ensure that no one knows about his presence here. Reading the paper while enjoying a finely prepared meal, the elder read the headline. The Straw Hat Pirates storm Egghead to take Vegapunk hostage. He was rather fond of the article based on the name alone. It was one of Morgan's clever concoctions. As the warrior god of defense science continued to eat, he questioned what the reality of the situation was. Doberman admitted that they hadn't yet received any word from CP0 on whether or not their assassination mission had succeeded. However, based on Sentomaru's resistance, it wouldn't be all too hard for them to come to their own conclusions. They could safely assume that Dr. Vegapunk and all 6 of his satellites were up in the Labostratum area of the island. Besides that, they were also likely to have 4 Seraphim assigned to protect them. It was also to be presumed that they have joined forces with the Yonko Straw Hat Luffy and his crew of 10. Their advance guard consisted of the CP0 agents Rob Lucci, Kaku, and Stussy. But besides them, there were also a bunch of other Cypherpole agents being kept hostage in the Fabrio Stratum. This was presumed to be the doing of Sentomaru and his battalion of Mark III Pacifista. With the Frontier Dome currently at 100%, they could be sure that nobody would be able to get in or out of the Labostratum. But unfortunately, they had no way of knowing what could have happened on the inside of the dome within the last day or so. St. J. Garcia Saturn was wondering where the researchers and workers of Egghead Island had gone. Doberman responded that they'd evacuated the day before. However, they were able to track and confirm the current positions of these ships. With a grim expression on his face, the extension of Imu's power denoted the fact that any one of them could know something. And that possibility was more than enough to justify their ships being sunk immediately. And hopefully the crew will be able to stop this from happening, since we don't want another Ohara situation on our hands. But before seeing to this command, Doberman would mention one more thing. The gluttonous Jewelry Bonnie was reported to currently be on Egghead as well. St. J. Garcia Saturn recognized his name as belonging to Kuma's daughter. And interestingly enough, his response towards her was pretty different. They no longer had any use for her. But since she was just a little girl, he figured she could be left alone. Very weird. Is Bonnie actually just a kid who's fooled everyone into thinking that she's older thanks to the power of her devil fruit? But just then, an officer would call out to Admiral Kizaru. They had picked up a transmission from Egghead, what appeared to be a long-range call. A Den Mushi began to ring over in the Holy Land of Mary Joyce. At the same time, one of the officers would let Kizaru know that since he has a black transponder snail on his left arm, he can listen in on the call too. Inside the so-called Room of Authority, 4 of the Gorosei gathered together for a call with Vegapunk York. They were surprised to hear from her. York called out the behavior of the elders and how they had been trying to kill her along with all the others, which was especially rude given all the trouble she went through to tell them about Vegapunk Stella's betrayal. And if you notice, her face is a bit bruised here. They didn't make any argument against what she had done for them, but at the same time, she was just as much of a Vegapunk as he was. St. J. Garcia Saturn was also listening in on the call while sipping on his wine. York argued that if she had any interest in the Void Century, it would make sense for her to snitch on them in the first place. Again, the elders had to admit the truth of that as well. The sword wielder among them was impressed by the fact that York was even still alive. He questioned if CP0 had visited them and what exactly happened to the Straw Hat Pirates. This question was slightly sidestepped. York proclaimed that since she was the one calling them, she'd allow them to take a wild guess. She'd remind them that she has the Seraphim under her control. The fact that she managed to survive the night shouldn't come as a surprise at all. But swiftly shifting the subject, York would question why there was a fleet surrounding the island. She wondered if they were looking to wage war against her. But that's when one of them would admit that they had a change of heart when it comes to the subject. He asked if she would be capable of replicating the Mother Flame on her own. York was delighted to hear that they still wanted something from her. She was glad that she contacted them. It would be said that what they were acting on was a special request. York wondered what sort of request this might be and who exactly made the call. But if that was really what they were after, she would need to make it on Egghead Island. With a big smile on her face and her eyes obscured, Vegapunk York would ask that they promise not to lay a finger on her or her laboratory. This was agreed upon. She also threw in the fact that she still wanted to be a celestial dragon. They also agreed to this, and I wonder if that's just talk or they're serious. But with all that being said, Vegapunk York would tell them that they had themselves a deal. However, there was just one more thing that she needed them to do first. With tears flooding her eyes, she cried out for them to save her. Straw Hat Luffy was here, and he was going to kill her. Kizaru and each of the 5 elders were shocked. It's the craziest thing. Vegapunk York was completely laid out on the floor with Zoro holding his sword above her. She had already been handcuffed, and everyone was together. Even Bonnie and Rob Lucci were here. The only ones missing from this shot were Robin and the other Vegapunks. Well, I guess Stussy and Kaku are also missing. Nami, with what looked like a weapon in her hand, believed that everything was finally beginning to make sense. Luffy was chomping on some meat. He didn't really get what was going on, but he figured that they could just use her as a human shield to escape. Bonnie wondered if this meant that they were under siege. Usopp was the one that had her on the line. And I'm not sure how likely it is, but if these guys managed to record this call, oh man, that would be one hell of an exposing moment. And Vegapunk Stella just made a simple remark about how things actually were. And just like that, Vegapunk York's carefully laid out plan of conspiracy and treachery has been thwarted. I don't know what's more impressive, them saving Stella from such a rough situation, or the fact that they've somehow managed to get Rob Lucci to be with the gang during all of this. And I think this moment is very much owed to the Straw Hats by now as a Yonko's crew. I am so happy to see them actually be in a position of power and control over their own situation. And I think we can expect some clarification as to what went down to bring us here in the next one. After taking L's with Garp and Sword, it's great to be winning with the Straw Hats again. Amazing change of pace, but of course the danger of their predicament continues. Hell, I wonder if Luffy might just say something to the elders here. Let us know what you think about this chapter and the crazy changes being seen all over the One Piece world right now. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.